Hi, this is Russ with DevotedGolfer.tv. I'm in Carlsbad, California. Is that the right place?
We are in the border, right at Vista, California.
Okay. And I'm here with Alex D. in the Fujikura ENSO studio.
That's right. This is our fit-on studio where we do a lot of our fitting trials of our new products. And of course, yes, ENSO is right here, so we could do a lot of our evaluation with it as well. Correct.
And so this is, tell me a little bit about the origin of this. I mean, not everybody on the planet has, what do we have there, 8 Vicons lined up on the wall?
The origin of this came from, wanting to know what the performance of the club is and what happens before you hit the ball. I think with the advent of the ball flight monitor, it really changed everything in terms of like the information you get of what the ball is doing. And what we want to do is we're creating shafts. We want to know how those shafts can affect that ball flight, right? And so a lot of it in the past has been done by some more trial and error. We kind of know the stiffer tips might bring the club shaft down, the club down, but there's a lot of different swings and a lot of information to process, and it's not easy to do to kind of look at performance. So a system like this gives us a window to look at performance, to measure it quantitatively, and in some ways even capture what the feel is that people are experiencing and quantify that.
And this is the premier facility at looking what goes on in a golf shaft.
Absolutely true. Yeah, we are able to look at this club in ways that I think no one else really can. It's a high frame rate, high accuracy system we've got that can look at how you move the handle.
And this is how you track how you move the handle.
Correct. Just like you see in like motion capture for animation where they have these little markers or video games. We do the same thing, but we put them on the club. We put them on the face, on the head, and on, right below the grip. We've got some calibration clusters that we could put on the face when we calibrate, so we know where the face center is. We also map the curvature of the face by the bulge and roll. So we really know everything about this club as it's being swung. And everything that's...
So when we talk about face calibration, I happen to know where that little piece is.
Yeah.
It's sitting right here.
Break it out.
Okay. So this is face calibration. We put this on the center of the face.
Yep, we line up the score lines, and then it'll kind of, since we know the geometry of this jig, we actually can then locate its position in relationship to the other fixed markers. And then we take that snapshot. So now we know where the center face is. We actually know the loft, the lie of the club.
Yeah.
Even then we zero face alignment out right here. And then when you remove it, it still remembers where those were, even though those aren't there. Okay. And now we could still know where you impacted.
Because you're looking at the relationship of these points to these points, so now we know exactly where the face is.
Correct. But for us, it's again high frame rate, high accuracy during the swing, and it's the full swing. So we're getting this information from, takeaway all the way to the top, all the way to impact.
So you mentioned the word frame rate. That's an interesting number, of course, because I've been involved with other people's 3D studios. Tell me about your frame rate.
These cameras are, first of all, they retail up to $30K, which is extremely prohibitive for people to have in their own studio. So you're looking almost at $250,000.
So we're looking at some people that have like a $25K studio, and you're dealing with 8 30K cameras.
Yeah, it's cost prohibitive. We understand that, but we needed these because one, they're going to operate up to 2,000 frames per second, and they have a high megapixel frame rate to really get that kind of nitty gritty on these markers and their accuracy of position in space. We call it sub-millimeter accuracy. Now, what?
So these are Vicons, right?
These are Vicons, right? We partnered with Vicon to create.
And so this is a camera that was used to make movies like Avatar.
Correct.
So when you decided to build something like this, where'd you go? How did you? What was the process?
Yeah,
for finding this technology and for moving it into golf.
For me, there was a need to measure performance because in the past it always had been more of a subjective thing where you have to ask someone to hit it and then get their feedback, and that feedback is sometimes tainted by subjectivity, whether they can feel it or not, whether they can explain it well, and you have to process that information. It's not always. It's not scientific. It's got a lot of noise in it. So I wanted to be able to measure the performance. And there are ways to measure performance that we do now. A lot of people say, look, we can measure the CPM, we can measure the flex, maybe the EI. Those don't necessarily correlate directly to performance. How does it feel? What did it do to the ball? Did it make it loft up, loft down, left, right? Things like that. So right now, the goal of having ENSO was to answer those questions. Right. So we partnered up. I went on a search about in 2008 for motion capture systems and who could have the frame rate and the accuracy that we needed. And Vicon had these cameras at the time that were, again, high speed, high frame rate, high megapixel that can do what we wanted. Everything else was, sub 200 or 200 something frames a second.
Yeah.
They're lower cost, but the problem with those is that, you're going to sacrifice accuracy. Even Vicon had lower frame rate cameras that we had options to use, and we
Right.
wanted to try them, but they never could meet the requirements we had to have. When you look at measuring a golf swing and the ball flight, you're looking at fractions of a degree. And when
Right.
you're off by a degree, you can't even tell the difference between a 9.5 and a 10.5 degree club.
Right.
And we had to be able to do that. So that's where Vicon came into play, and we gave them a call, and it turned into a partnership of creating something really special. And again, these frame rates up to 2,000. We actually
Yeah.
window that down. It's too much frame rate. That's too much data. We fill up a hard drive in seconds. So we actually make it like a 3 times multiple of our video. So we're running at around 730 from something frames a second, and it's divided by 3 equally by the frame rate of our video cameras.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what have we learned?
We've learned a lot. I mean, basically, we're capturing the entire club and how it responds to any swing, right? So, an example, we went through all our information, all our data. What I like to think of ENSO now is it's a giant data collector. It's a really sophisticated data collector of golf performance. We're able to connect what happens to the handle, then what the shaft does, what the head does in response, and then how the ball flew. We're actually connecting those all together now. And when you run...
So you're connecting these dots with these dots, right?
Absolutely. Everything that happens in between is due to the shaft.
Yeah.
Right? And so we
Yeah.
have a test matrix of shafts where we know exactly how we mess with that
Yeah.
stiffness profile.
So this has always been, for most of us in the fitting business, this has always been a bit of a black hole,
Yeah,
right?
it's esoteric. It's really hard to know what's going on. One, it just looks the same as every other, and
Yeah.
you might be able to measure a weight or maybe a CPM, but there's much more to it, and we want to expose what those things do through taking data like this with an ENSO
Yeah,
system.
yeah. So we talked earlier about the term degrees of freedom. Right?
Yeah.
And so what we're looking here at, help me here.
Well, again, when you do motion capture, we're talking about measuring 6 degrees of freedom, right?
Right.
6 degrees of freedom is like 6 positions in space as you move something in X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
and the rotations in each plane. So an example of that is when someone swings this club, a rotation about this, we might call it rotation about Z. That's also known as face closure, right? Or
Right.
handle
Okay. Yep.
rotation.
Yep.
There's also a rotation this way. I call this like a release rotation. There's also another rotation, which is this way, about the handle. So again,
Yeah,
we're
so
measuring...
those of us who talk about
There's
ulnar
3,
deviation. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
3 of those rotations. There's 3
Yeah.
positions, and we measure a lot in this club, whether it's from the handle, from the shaft, to the head, what it's doing in terms of all those motions. Now, when you look at all that information, it's blinding. So what we do is we process it through analytics, and it tells us which ones are more important for whatever we're looking at. If we're trying to look at loft of the ball loft, or the launch angle, what factors are important, and it'll tell us that. For kick, what's important
Yeah.
per different types of swing.
Now,
So
now
really,
I know that this is all internal research.
It's internal research.
You got any hints for us yet?
Well, here's an example. Like we have a lot of data we've captured already, and one simple question we asked was, how can we get more kick, right? And we measure kick actually in 2 directions. One toward the target, and one actually goes away from you because we broke
Right.
it up into X and Y. Kick doesn't always just go toward the target, unfortunately. But I said, we ask a question, we pose a question to the data. Tell us what makes the shaft kick more. And the answer was if the midsection has a more reactive stiffness profile. It's not as stiff, and the handle and the tip section is stiffer. We could generate a maximum kick.
Mid-soft.
Yeah. So
Mid-soft?
in this
You know,
profile,
or the
it's-
other way around, tip stiff, butt stiff, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so now we took that and added other features to create our accelerate line, which you're holding the Speeder Pro Accelerate.
Okay.
And the idea here is how can you generate the maximum speed? 1, you want the most kick. 2, you could probably reduce the weight of the shaft, right? You can also increase the balance point. So these have some of the highest balance points we've ever made in any golf shaft. Highest balance points, lighter weight, stiffer torque, and that profile, right? That gives you the most kick. So it's a combination of ingredients, like to say,
Yeah.
that will give you incredible speed,
Yeah.
right?
It's like cooking. If you get all the spices right, it tastes great, right? But every one of them is a little different.
Correct. And I think that's what
A little
Enso's
different
got.
ingredient.
And Enso helps us cook,
Yeah.
right? It'll help us look at all those ingredients and how to best put them together to create an outcome that we want, whether it's more launch, more left, more right, less spin, more spin, right? It'll actually help guide us in product development as well, and as it did here.
So might you be saying that we're no longer making a shaft, taking it out on tour, and seeing if it works or not?
There's always validation.
Yeah.
And we want to have that kind of validation.
Right.
But
Well,
at the same
but-
time, we're predicting that validation before, we're predicting that before
You're
it occurs.
predicting it before you're taking it out there,
Correct.
instead of just making a bunch of shafts and taking them out there and
Yeah.
saying, oh, this
Prototype
one worked.
A,
Yeah.
B, and C, and D, yeah.
Yeah,
But again,
yeah.
like the different swings have different, will create a different response and a different outcome. So
Mm-hmm.
again, having that information for different swings, one shaft will not do the same thing for everybody. Once you change the swing type, things
Yeah.
things
yeah.
vary, right?
So if we were talking to the average golfer, could we say that if a shaft feels good, it probably is working for you? Or is that not always the case?
I think that's always the case. Because something can always feel good, but they need to shave 200 spin, 300 spin off of the ball. And that's nothing you can feel necessarily. But, again, I think a lot of people who see the ball flight, they sometimes internalize that as feel. So, if we try to blindfold some people, like they can't see the ball, and it's hard for them to determine what the feel is, unless they can see that ball flight. So sometimes they're tied in together.
Yeah, yeah. The feely thing is interesting, as I've explored feeling relating to stiffness recently.
Yeah.
And taking great ball strikers and saying, is this stiffer than that?
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell.
And, an interesting explanation I could give to you about feel and stiffness is when we do analysis on ENSO, we can measure the deflection of the shaft throughout the swing. And there are times, and then we'll poll them, say, does it feel stiff or soft? And we get a number that people are communicating back to us as like a common range where it feels just right. So if a player came in and they couldn't even explain the feel or tell us if it was soft or stiff, and there's plenty of those kind of people, we could actually just move them into a stiffness that several people prefer, right? So now I can almost fit people for feel in that way,
Yeah.
even if they can't communicate it. And another thing to think about too is the swing type. A lot of times, you put something like an R-flex in someone who swings slow speed. A lot of those people who swing slow, they're casting. And that cast move is a huge amount of deflection on the shaft, right? So the person a skill golfer who doesn't cast, they actually, most of the time, will be really gentle in their backswing, in their transition.
Yeah.
And they're not loading it that heavily as someone who just casts the heck out of it.
Right. Yeah.
So it almost puts a contrast, it's almost like a conflict of that you would not always put a softer shaft in someone who swings slow, because they're actually going to deflect the heck out of it.
later in a swing.
Over deflect it just at the transition. Because that's where it deflects the most usually, as a transition from the top of the swing to downswing.
Well, how about when they get to here, they've been swinging slow up to this point, and then all of a sudden the hands take off?
The hands take off, but for the most part, if you cast, you've lost a lot of your energy already. So it doesn't take off as much as the person who's
a slow swinger and brings it to here and then takes off.
Yeah, those guys get to take off.
Yeah, and what do I do for those guys in terms of stiffness?
For those guys,
Or let's rephrase that, instead of stiffness, profile.
every swing is different. And that's a key thing that we want to bring up is when you look at characterizing a swing, a lot of people today might just say, what's the clubhead speed? That's really common, 90 mile per hour, 100 mile per hour.
Yeah.
And they want to fit off that number. And what we've seen with ENSO is there's a lot of ways to get 100 miles an hour. There's a lot of ways to get 90 or 80.
Yeah.
Your hands could be moving sometimes 16 miles an hour, maybe just 10 miles an hour. You could be releasing, and that release is giving you an extra 30 miles an hour or just extra 6 miles an hour. But the end speed is the same.
Right.
So now what I'm trying to explain is that there's so many different ways to get that same speed that if you were just to say, I want to just focus on the clubhead speed, you're missing a lot because there's so much differentiation in that swing.
You mean somebody's actually asked you, hey, my swing speed is 95 miles an hour, what shaft should I use?
That's common. They've
I get
asked us
that question all the time.
That's very common, right? But now we want to break it down and say, well, it's also a function of how fast your hands are moving, how much do you rotate it, how much do you deflect it at the top, and because all those are individual moves, right? And what's your tempo? ENSO measures all those things, and then we can bring that into an analytics package that tells us what's best for that person.
Yeah. So what's unique about Accelerate?
Accelerate is, again, those combinations that create speed, right? And again, ENSO helps us put those combinations together. You might have maybe in the past seen curves where the stiffness profile in the middle is soft. You might say, well, I've seen that before, but not in combination with a high balance point,
Okay.
right, for example.
Yeah.
So now we're really putting all those factors in together that create speed, right? And is it for everybody? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Because for some people, it might give too much kick, and they can't handle that, right? And that's why there's other offerings we have that are non-accelerate. So it's about fitting. We can't get everybody with one product. We try. We do the best we can. As a matter of fact, all our products are flighted. which means that if you were to go from a lighter to a heavier, the launch is going to keep reducing and the spin's going to keep
Yeah.
coming.
And so you mentioned high balance. How do you see balance
How do
in
we
a shaft?
You can't see it. Yeah, but you can measure it, right? Through
Yeah.
swing weight.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just- you
I
just-
mean, you just
yeah, you
balance
put, yeah,
it.
you put in your finger, right? And
Yeah.
the higher it goes, it means there's less weight here.
Yeah.
And that helps you with the club swing weight, right? When you're assembling it and you have,
Right.
for example, either you want that club a little longer or you're using these heads today that are 5 to 10 grams heavier than before. They're
Right.
going to increase the swing weight and for the club swing weight. So when you have a shaft that's lighter, you can get that standard club swing weight back, even with a heavier head. Or you can increase the weight in the head, which is, I think, makes much more advantaged for impact, right? You
Yeah,
get more
yeah.
energy into the ball
If you can get it around.
if you can get it around.
Right. So let's go over to the Enso console and show me some of the things that you can see over there.
Sure.
Okay, so we've moved over to the control panel of the Enso Studio, and Alex is going to show me how it works and what it is he can see. What's this first picture?
Yeah, this is actually, it's a CG of the room, and we can see all our cameras and where they're located in space. And I could kind of move around in here, and you can see how.
So we're looking up here at this array of cameras,
Correct.
and we're actually seeing what they're focused on.
Yep, we have those 8 high-speed motion capture cameras at top, and also the 2 video cameras, one face on and one down the line. They're all synced together.
Okay.
And so if a shaft if the club is moved into the space, you can see how it's going to be moving in this space. And then what I can do is turn on a video camera. We'll actually look at one of the video cameras. And then I can actually show you how that club moves, how we put a CG over the club
Yeah.
in 3D, and it's superimposed on this 2D video as we move it around.
Okay. So we can actually see the club moving around
Yeah,
right here.
it'll be superimposed right over the real club, so it'll be lit up like a Star Wars lightsaber or something in your hand.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're visually seeing how that club is being tracked in space real time.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah, I can see it there. Yeah.
and now when we and one of the things I could show you here too is how the cameras see each one of these markers, and that would look something like this, where you can show these camera rays, and for accuracy's sake, you need 2 of these cameras looking at one of these markers to stereoscopically triangulate on it. But what we'll do is actually have at least 3. So the 3 cameras per marker throughout the entire swing we have visual on. That could really highly accurately track that marker throughout the capture.
Okay.
Okay? So the other things, when we capture a swing, what we're able to do is look at the trace of the swing. We can see actually how that club moves in space. So we could actually fly through it as well in 3D. And when you fly through it, because there's no video everywhere, we actually can focus in and look, for example, at the top of the swing or the downswing transitions in any direction we want, even from underneath their feet if we wanted to, or face on.
Because you're going virtual.
We're virtual. At that point,
Yeah,
we're virtual.
yeah,
We're flying through this virtual space of the swing. And we could trace different locations of that club and tag what's happening in that spot, whether we want to look at the positions, velocities, accelerations, whether it's at impact location, center face, or we want to look at the handle and say, what's the handle speed? How are they turning things over? How fast are they rotating things? All those are inputs. And we can visualize that information here on these charts and this graph, right?
So we look at handle rotation, and we're looking at how torque is going to affect the delivery of the head
You
at some
can
point.
absolutely do that, correct.
Yeah.
We actually measure the twist of the shaft, right, throughout the entire swing. How does different shaft stiffnesses and torque change the response of the shaft, and how does that change the club head orientation, right, for your type of swing? It'll leave it, and it's not just a function of left and right. That twist also affects loft and spin. So
Okay. So are you finding high rotators and medium rotators?
we actually find a whole bunch. Yeah, absolutely do.
Yeah.
Some are really efficient in turning their wrists over, and some aren't. At different types of swings, right? When we created Enso, one of the first things we wanted to do was just have some kind of a shortcut, like some kind of like some data output that would be of value real time as you took the shot. So every time someone takes a shot, there's a log file that's outputted that gives some key factors of the swing. Okay, and so some of them that I like to look at, we highlighted them here. And so for this case, we could look at things like the max handle speed. That's how fast they're moving the handle in their downswing. Okay, how fast they move it. and then we'll tag that location, okay? And then we'll say, what's their handle speed at impact? And there's generally a difference between the two. Where it's fastest, then it slows down to let the club turn around.
Okay.
A lot of people have different techniques for how they slow their hands down. It's a function of how they swing, okay? Okay, so we can also look at things like max shaft deflection, right? And that's, again, your downswing, where and how much will the shaft bend the most? And we quantify that number. And for me, that's a good feel aspect.
And you quantify where that happens as well.
Exactly, because we captured the entire swing. Okay, so some of the things we were talking about was this log that can give us some information. We just talked about max deflection. And from a shaft point of view, we could just look at 3 simple things. At impact, how much is the shaft leading? And most of the time it'll lead because the CG is back, so it'll make the head lead the hands.
Yep.
And we measure that deflection amount in inches. And then it's going to also droop, right? Because the CG's out here, and it's going to droop.
Right.
Yeah. And we measure how much it's drooping down in inches. And then we measure how much the shaft is twisting at impact. Now, remember, we have all this information throughout the swing. But right now, we're just going to give you this information at impact. Because it's kind of like the meat and potatoes. It got to this spot.
Yeah.
So from a shaft point of view, this information is important to us. From a fitting point of view, the question is what did these deformations to the shaft do to the head? Right? So now we measure.
And where did they occur, and how stable were they in this little area just before impact?
So now we can measure, for example, the total shaft contribution to the head loft. We break it down into loft, lie, and face alignment. Okay? So in this case, for this gentleman, this tour player who swung a specific shaft, he was able to add 4.4 degrees of loft. Now, if you have the static value of loft, you could add 4.4. That's the shaft contribution.
The shaft contributed 4 degrees of loft.
Yeah, we can measure that now. Now, yes, you could hit it and just say, yeah, it's a little higher. But again, for different players, you're going to get a different loft.
Right.
And different swing types. So now we capture all this information. And for this case, we're actually measuring the shaft's influence on loft. Keep in mind that if the shaft was infinitely stiff, that means it's like a rebar. And we actually create a virtual shaft that you swing, a club that you swing every time. And we're referencing this infinitely stiff shaft.
So you say virtual shaft. So in the software, you're seeing
We're modeling.
You're seeing a broomstick.
We're modeling
basically,
this broomstick club that
isn't
swings with you.
Bending at all.
That isn't
and then
bending at
you're
all.
looking at the difference between where it actually is and where the projection of the broomstick.
That's right. That becomes a reference point.
Yeah,
And so if it's ahead of it, it's ahead of what it would have been as a broomstick. If it's drooping down, drooping down compared to the broomstick. If it's got a kick, that kick is in reference to this broomstick.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. What else can we see here?
So we talked about what the shaft does to the club head. I could also look at kick speed. We can measure how much it kicks. And again, we want that shaft to kick because it's providing energy. And so some of the things I look at when I fit somebody would be like, for example, am I getting the right shaft deflection? Am I getting the right kick? And am I getting the head in the orientation I wanted to get the ball launched the way I want? Those 3 things are somewhat critical.
I mean, it's not that difficult to get kick, is it? You just put a softer shaft in your hand, and it kicks.
I wish that was true. I mean, sometimes a kick could be negative, right? It's a dance we make with the shaft, and it's a response that goes back to each other. And if you get one, and
it's too soft,
it
won't kick at all.
It could just lag.
Right.
You could imagine infinitely soft will just lag.
You don't hit into the elasticity to the point that the elasticity for
you haven't grooved to it. You might not have grooved to it. Your swing is not grooved to the point where you could get the most kick out of a soft shaft, for example. And if it's too stiff, it might cycle several times during the downswing, and it might move forward. And then right when
you press it up against its elastic limit, it bounces
it's starting to bounce back. So we've seen things
back.
called negative kick,
Yeah.
where now we're subtracting clubhead speed because the shaft is now starting to rebound away from the target. Okay? So from my point of view, we don't want that. We want to make sure all the speeds toward the target.
During impact. Can you see during impact?
Absolutely, we see during impact. We actually project right up to it. So this kick is something we could measure. We could get impact location anywhere on the face. And again, since we know the bulge and roll on the face, depending on where you hit it, we can tell you which orientation the club head's in. So, you'd be surprised. I mean, there's a lot going on in that bulge and roll on the club face. So that if you hit it off, quarter inch, half inch away from some spot, and that's not a lot, the angles completely change.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we could see that really clearly. And we also know, for example, your path and attack, and those are really highly accurate numbers in relationship to the center face. Okay, so we're really interested in what that face is doing, and we could track it all going into impact and really get a very accurate attack and path. Now, one of the things I like to talk about is what happens at max hand speed. And we already went over like what your hand speed was, maximum. And usually it occurs when your right elbow comes to your right side for a right-handed golfer. Right around here, your hands peak out. It has most likely something to do with these geometries of this huge lever, and you could really accelerate, moving it down. But once you get to here, you're decreasing this radius, and it's going to move slower because of that. I consider at this point you're more like a T-Rex arms, because they're small and they're not going to give you that velocity. So it slows down versus somebody having this huge lever. They're bringing down with their shoulder turn and their hip turn,
Right.
A lot going on to get that hand speed.
Yeah, and now all of that stuff is stabilized.
Once you get to here, it's a different swing now.
Yeah.
So what happens is
So the hand isn't moving, but the head's still moving.
Although the hand does move, and different golfers have different hand speeds.
Okay.
We were talking about like this, what the club head speed is here at max hand speed. Generally, it's about right here when your elbow comes to your side. And I've seen numbers from 50 to 75-ish. And the 75 guys, you might think, oh, that's great. Look how fast you're moving it already. But the problem is most of those people have cast, and they've lost their energy. So by the time they get here to impact, it's a real short amount of time. Their club is generally going to be at a lower angle, maybe here.
Yeah.
While a guy at 50, he's got his club still like here.
He's still got wrist cock.
Wrist locked. Yeah, he hasn't.
yeah.
He's got a lot of energy stored up still.
Yeah.
So in the next 0.04 seconds that goes to impact,
Right.
he's going to generate a lot more speed. So if the race was to stop here, the guy who casts has the highest club head speed. But if the race ends at impact, the guy is going to get passed up fast.
Yeah, yeah.
So the guy who has a slower club head speed here at the max hand speed, he's sometimes going to add, and he's got the wrist cock still. He's going to add, typically we've seen for good players, 35, 38 miles an hour. They're going to add more club head speed, okay? And some of the players with really unique swings with a lot of energy buildup, they're going to add 50, almost 60 miles an hour in this bottom part of the swing. Now,
And those aren't the guys with small forearms, are they?
No, but
These guys are relatively strong.
not necessarily. They have great technique.
Okay.
They have great technique.
Yeah.
They're not always the biggest, and they're not. It's hard to give that to relate those two all the time.
Okay.
Great technique.
Okay.
But a guy who casts, he's going to add maybe 6 to 8 miles an hour. So the guy who casts is swinging just as hard as someone who swings, 100 miles an hour. He's swinging almost the same.
Let me make sure I got that number right. You're saying he's going to add 6 to 8 miles an hour.
From max hand speed to impact. So
his entire speed has been generated by his body turn.
And wrist release at the top. He already got it to maybe he got to 70 miles an hour, and then he just gets 6 more.
Okay.
So he's at 81 miles an hour, which is real
because he's
typical.
already uncocked his wrist too early in the swing, and he has no wrist left.
That's right.
Okay.
So
he's bunting.
You're never going to get.
I call them bunters.
Yeah, you're never going to get the 100-mile-per-hour swing unless you fix it from above.
Got it.
Because once you're here, you've already lost it. So if you're looking at swing technique, it's going to be, it's what happens from here to here.
Yeah.
Then everything else, you're not in control of anymore. You have to release it. It's got to go to impact.
Yeah.
And people come in with they're swinging 80-something miles an hour, and you say, look, your hand speed at impact now. What's the hand speed at impact? We have that number, right? For some people, they're going to swing 100 miles an hour, 115, and their hand speed at impact is just 10 miles an hour. And I have a guy yesterday, or a couple of days ago, came in, and he swings 81 miles, 82 miles an hour, and his hand speed is the same at impact. So he's moving his hands the same. He probably feels he's putting in the same amount of effort in. And it's true, because his hands are still moving that fast.
Yeah, yeah.
But he's just not getting the club head speed to move fast because he's lost it.
And the guys that generate more club head speed, their hands are actually going pretty slow through impact.
I've seen variance.
Okay.
I've seen variance, right? As low as 10, as high as 16, 17. And then for the long drive guys,
so you're talking about 10, 16 versus 80.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Long drive guys are crazy. They really can keep their hand speed up in the 20-mile-per-hour plus range and still release it. They're doing two things that we don't usually see.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay, so
really
that's what the speed's coming from. Not only are every aspect of their body is involved in generating club head speed, and they've peaked them all.
And one of the things I like to talk about with ENSO is that when we talk about club head speed, we can actually break apart all the contributions to club head speed, whether it's coming from your release of your wrist. There's a certain velocity, and that's usually about 80% of your swing. And then a lot of it's coming from your hands, because as you move the club in space, it's moving together with you. So if your hands are 10 miles an hour moving, your club's moving 10 miles an hour with it. Because we also measure the club face, I told you, in an entire, the whole club face has got, we know it's a curvature, and we know where you impact the ball. You know, where you impact it, I could then tell you all the orientations of the club head. And then maybe you mishit it. If you mishit it, a lot of people in the other realms of fitting systems, they'll just delete that shot. But for me, it's still valuable information, and I could project what would have happened if you would have hit center face, right? Because I know the orientations of the club head there, the velocity there.
Yeah.
And this also brings up a curious thing about smash factor. A lot of people talk about smash factor, and you need the club head speed to make this number.
Right.
But the question is where's that club head speed coming from? Is it at impact location, or is it at center face? If you don't know that, you're potentially getting a number that's not so accurate.
Right.
And there's velocity changes throughout the face.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, so if you toe strike while you are rotating through impact, you have head speed that is very difficult for most systems to track.
That's right.
Yeah. And if you heel hit while you're toe rotating, you get no contribution from toe rotation. So you're going to get a misread of smash factor based upon where you strike the face and how much the head is rotating through impact.
That's right.
So when you see smash factors that are illegal, 1, 2, 1, 2, you know, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, you know that that pretty much came from head rotation.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Show me a swing and how you're tracking this information real time during a swing.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to open up a swing here from a professional, and this professional we can see right here. And we just went over his swing data. And I could then show you, for example, several graphs. And this data, of course, can be exported. But right now we're going to look at, for example, let's take a look at shaft deflection. This is how the shaft deflects as he swings. And we can take a look at different deflection points. So this deflection is rising here, and it's maximum right there. So he has a certain move that gets that, as he rotates that around, that's where it deflects the most. It unloads a little bit, and then right before impact, loads up again. Right there, loads up. So we can see that. We took a look also at hand speed. So let's take a quick look at that. Club face, velocity, hand speed. Here we're looking at a chart of his hand speed. Let's play it. And let's talk about where his max hand speed is located. Right as his elbow comes to his side, that's where his hand speed peaks out right there. And at this point, I think we talked about his head speed being around 70-something miles an hour maybe, and then he's going to add almost another 50. No, actually his club head speed, I think, was like 60 or something. Then he adds another 50 to 100. No, he adds almost 60, right? Because he's 120 something.
Yeah.
So this guy at the time had our highest addition of speed from this point to impact. Because everything that happens here happens really quick. So again, you know, look at his club position, right? How high it is. The guy who casts, it's got to be more like this or down here. For a lot of different people, this swing right here is unique in that, see how that shaft hasn't reached top parallel? It's still at an angle.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's pulling it down from that angle almost straight. So he's not bending it. Like a cast would definitely take that thing around. But he's pulling it almost straight down, which is one, it's really efficient. There's no resistance when you move a club straight up and down along its axis versus trying to do this, which has got a lot of resistance.
Okay, so he's actually
So look at that pull.
pulling the shaft down its axis.
Yes,
Got
which
it.
has no resistance. Right? You can
Yeah,
really
yeah.
speed things up. If I ask you to hold a club out like this and move it,
Right.
it's hard. There's a resistance in doing this. But if you
Well,
put it in
there's
its axis,
a resistance from the head
so
itself.
the weight properties,
The
right?
weight
But
of
you
the
put
head.
it in along its axis, I ask you to move it. You could move it and you feel nothing, right? So in this case, you could really accelerate it if you could move it along the same plane. And at that point, if you move it along the same plane, you're not putting a lot of deformation on it. But if you cast, you're going to
I
get
get
the
it.
club
Yeah,
head
yeah,
speed, but
yeah.
you're going to get a huge amount of deflection.
Right.
So in this case, we might see a very low deflection here, right? versus a cast guy who might swing half this guy's speed,
Right.
but have a huge amount of deflection. So sometimes that idea of soft shaft going into a slower swing isn't
Yeah.
always the most accurate way of looking at things,
Yeah,
but it's conventional now.
right.
You know, I can mark different spots too. This is the club face middle, but I can also get things like a grip. That's how he moves his grip in space. But let's talk about down here was this log. And this log is where we were talking about things like his max handle speed at impact, shaft deflection, his lead and lag of the shaft, right? And the twist of the shaft, how it contributed to the club head. We went over his kick speed, how much speed he added from max hand speed to impact. So at max hand speed, he was 66 miles an hour, and then he ramped it up to 125.9 at impact. Okay? So from there to there, that small little distance, man, this guy added just a heck of a lot of speed. I mean, who can subtract that real quick? 125 minus 66. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Head speed addition. That's my amplification factor.
Right, yep.
Right? Good position gives you that great amplification factor. Bad technique, low amplification factor. So everyone who swings at 80, 70 something, the cast, they're adding 6 miles an hour. Okay. We also cover things that we didn't talk about, like backswing time, downswing time, and tempo. We have an overall tempo number.
Well, Alex, it's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate it.
Alex D., Fujikura, and that was a not so brief overview of the ENSO system.
Hard to keep that one short.
It was. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.